Hey everybody, John Brown here, and I'm going to talk to you today about Above and Below, another game by Ryan Lucott. You may remember I reviewed 8-Minute Empires Legends, which I mostly liked and thought it was better than the original 8-Minute Empires. I also reviewed The Ancient World, which up to this date has been my favorite game of his. This game has replaced The Ancient World as my favorite game of his. Now you might say, why do I want to give that away right at the beginning of my review? Well, this is also a game that I'm not necessarily going to universally recommend. This is a game that you and your group might actually have some issues with, and you might not enjoy nearly as much. So while it's a game I personally enjoy, let's take a look at how it's played, and I'll try to give you an idea why you may or may not like it, depending on what the game has to offer. Now, much like the Ancient World, where there's this great terrible evil where in that game you're fighting it, in this game your villagers have basically run away from a terrible evil and come to this new place that seems kind of idyllic. And you start the game with 3 workers. And well, if you want a complete look at playing the game or the rules, Rodney Smith does a great job of his videos where he shows you basically all the rules of the game and watch it played, or if you'd rather just see some gameplay in action, Rado runs through run through the game. So we're going to go over just real simply and real quickly what you can do in the game. So with your 3 villagers, and everyone starts with basically the same villagers. They look different but have different abilities. So you have a villager that can build with the hammer symbol. And then, well, you build these nice little houses. So when you build, you basically move that worker over to the side to show that you've used them. You pay the cost and you get buildings that give you resources, income every round. Some of them give you a limited number of resources. Some reset every round if you use one. Give you endgame bonuses or things like that. But these are the basic buildings that refill when you build them. There's much more expensive buildings also, and these buildings are actually going to be the same every game, and these buildings tend to focus around endgame scoring, and as you can see, based on certain items you have or certain dwellings that you have, you can get points at the end of the game, and again, they are associated with a higher cost. The third of the 4 types of buildings are these key buildings, and what's interesting about these is they aren't the same ones that come out every game, and these give you quite a bit of variability. See, this one building over here that costs only 1 gives you 2 potions right away, and you can use those in a way I'll explain later, but they give you rerolls, and we'll see why that's important, or allow you to put workers right into action the round you buy them. And these buildings will vary with each game as what's out, and these are going to probably go early in the game and to give players special abilities throughout the game. So basically, since you've used a worker, you'll build the building, you put it out on display, and move your guy over to show that you've used him. So another worker you can use is a teacher, where they can basically, or a trainer, where they can train new workers to come out and join you. And like I said, you can get a special ability that they come right in here, but normally when you train a worker, they'll come to this section, you won't be able to use them that round. Now the cost of workers will vary based on where they are on this board, and they will slide down after being purchased. So we see a builder in that 2 cost slot, and then someone who can build or train people in the 3 cost slot, and then someone who is a builder, and we'll get to what those other symbols mean, but basically the lanterns at the bottom of the dice involve successes, and the number is something you have to reach. Basically, the more lanterns in the lower number die, the better, but we'll see how that works momentarily. So again, if you were to train a worker, let's say we trained this guy, he would come over here. Normally, unless we have a special ability. And, well, we have a worker left that doesn't have any of those symbols. Well, what does that worker do? Well, that's where we have to get into, not necessarily the meat of the game, but where the game becomes interesting. But before we go into that, let's go over the last few actions any worker can do. So any worker can harvest. So we talked about before about how buildings get resources on them, and then you can basically send a worker to go harvest them. So let's say, we'll get these tokens or whatever. Now this is one of the more interesting mechanisms of the game, because at any point you can put a good that you acquired on your board, and it basically gives you 1 more income for every slot you fill in. Any of the same goods will have to go into the same slot, but it's nice to want to put goods out right away, because, well, you're going to get more income every round the rest of the game. However, these goods also count as endgame scoring bonuses. So the goods in these slots will give you 1 point each, so if I end up with 2 fish here, they're each going to be 1 point only. However, goods have different rarities. So, for example, these fish are actually pretty common. They're the 2nd most common item of the game. We see over here on this chart basically how common the items are going from top to bottom. And you also have to bear in mind that some items won't actually ever be found in buildings. They have to be found in a different way, which we'll get to in a moment. So if I get these fish, I might be tempted to get the income right away, but I might want to wait until later in the game where, let's say, I have this very rare item that I'm going to put in here, and then put some of the more common items down later on. So for example, if I put this item here, and then put these items here, each one of these fish are now going to be worth 2 points at the end of the game, and while it may be hard to fill up your board, you can get items worth all the way up to 6. And you can put items there any time, so you have to balance that getting money or getting goods. Or rather, getting points for your goods. But one other action you can always do is send someone basically to do labor to go get a coin. And whenever you are the first player to do that in a round, you're also going to get a cider token. We'll see how that works in a moment, but again, only the first player to do that. But if you really need that one coin, any worker can do that. The last main action in the game, you see this little 2 here, is to go exploring. You see, the place you found has a network of underground tunnels nearby, and you can go explore the caves. And the thing is, to do that is a little bit scary, so you have to have at least 2 available workers. And that's where these symbols come in. So, when you go on an adventure, and again, this is where the game kind of changes its tone a little bit, you have the encounter book. So whenever that happens, you'll draw one of these cards, and it's basically going to have a set of numbers on it. You roll a die, see what you get, and go to what paragraph the book is talking about. So if you've ever played Agents of Smersh, or my mind is drawing Arabian Nights, I believe, you're probably familiar with a book where there's going to have paragraphs of varying lengths that you will read and see what happens. Now, I don't really want to spoil anything, but basically, whenever you do this, you're going to be given a choice. And you're going to be given a choice of options that you can do with your characters and then goals to try to meet. So, if these 2 players adventure and I'll make something up, they come across some creature, they can try to befriend it, they can try to fight it. But each person on the adventure is going to roll a die. So I'm going to roll for my first person here. You roll 1 at a time. They rolled a 4. And then this is where these things come in. If you roll at least a 1, you'll get 1 success. So I know with this character I'm going to get at least 1 success. But if I roll a 3 or higher, I'll get 2 successes. So that will count as 2 successes, and then I rolled a 1, or a 2, excuse me. So I have a total of 3 successes here. And again, I get to choose which of the options I want to go for. And they're going to vary in numbers, and often one of them is going to be slightly higher than the other one. But we'll get to why it's not always necessarily the best choice to go for the more challenging option. Now, if you fail, basically, you fail at it, and in some instances there are negative consequences. But sometimes, usually if you succeed, you're going to get some sort of reward. Now, if you're really strapped, though, and let's say I have 3 successes there and I really needed 4, I could exert someone. If I exert someone, they basically take an injury. So instead of going to this spot where they have to rest, they go to this spot where they are injured. And if I succeed on that, I take the card and then I put it by my player board. The reason that I do that is there's a type of building that I didn't go over yet. Yep, they are underground dwellings, and they will have different things, and again, resources are different things that you will get. But in order to build an underground dwelling, you need to have a space that you can build it in, a space that you've successfully explored. You notice that last card there is a symbol on it we haven't seen yet, a bed, and we'll get to that in a second. So in each round, players will use their workers to do the actions they want. You can send more than one worker to do the same action, and if you go into the caves to explore, you have to spend at least 2 workers, but you can use more. Each player will end up using all their workers and a round will end. So I mentioned this bed. So at the start of the game you have 3 beds. And you can build above ground or underground dwellings if you have the space for the underground dwelling that have more beds. And the reason that's important is that at the end of a round, not only are you going to collect your income, a new cider will come out for next round, things like that, but you can use a bed to rest a worker and make them available for the next round. However, another function of a bed is to move a worker from an injured spot over to a spot where they still need rest. Now, a person can't sleep twice, so you can't use 2 beds on the same person. So if I had 3 beds, I could maybe bring 2 back and heal the 1 person. Now, there are other things I can do, though, where if there are potions I get in the game, I can use them to heal a person and then have them rest. Or if I got that cider that I talked about earlier, I could spend that to refresh a person who basically needs rest and move back. And then we'll go through each round until the game is over. Now, you may remember I said before, the harder option isn't always the better option. In general, you're probably going to get pretty good rewards from doing a hard option while exploring, but based on your options, you may gain or lose reputation by doing positive or negative choices. So at the end of the game, you're going to get points for your goods on the player board, like I said, straight up points on your card, points for your buildings based on what you have. You're also going to get points for your reputation. So the leader is going to get a certain number of points, and you're also going to, well, first, second, and third is going to score a certain number of points. In a two-player game, it's a little bit different. And then also you're going to score even some negative points based on where you are on the board. So your choices are going to matter, and then this is where you mark the rounds. And at the end of the final round, obviously whoever has the most points wins. All right, so Above and Below is not really a worker placement, action selection, I don't know, but basically you have the freedom to do what you want, based on what buildings you have, but you can always hire a person that's available, always build a building that's available if you have the workers available to do that. You can't really block people out of spaces, although you can take a building or a worker that they may want. There is another little special surprise with the workers, but I'll leave that for you to experience in the game yourself if you decide to go with it. And, well, you could play the game that way. You could just play straight up trying to get the most points that way, or you can go for adventures. And this is where the game diverges, where you may love the game or you may not really like it at all. Because it all depends on the group that you're playing with and what sort of game you want. So when you go on adventures underneath the ground, well, you don't know what you're going to get. You're going to get rewards if you succeed, but you might not succeed at all, whereas everything else is guaranteed to happen. So maybe you don't want to take that risk. You might get that rare good that you need underground, and then you can splay out the rest of your goods and score a lot of points. You may get nothing. You may succeed and get something that isn't really all that helpful for you. So you can choose your strategy, but some people may be turned off by that. Some people may not want to get into the story element of the game and just play the game for the most points and do the guaranteed thing. Some people might just want to adventure all the time, and based on luck, that person might end up doing very well or kind of poorly, just depending on what they get and what they need at the time or how they roll the dice. So if you are looking for a straight-up game about who plays the game the best, this game may not be for you. If you play in a group that, simply reads the text and it's basically what numbers do I need to succeed, what's my choice, okay, I'll roll, or I succeeded or I didn't, well, that's probably not going to be very fun. But if you're playing with a group that gets into it, that tells the story, that does voices, and just has fun with this game's awesome. This is easily, actually I was going to say one of the best games I played this year. It actually came out last year, and if I do an update of my top 10 games of last year, this game will be in my top 10, maybe even pretty high. I do want to play it a little bit more before I really decide that. And here's the thing, if you have the right group, if you have people getting into it and enjoying it and playing games for fun, and not necessarily, you can try to win, obviously, but it's not all about trying to decipher mechanisms as best possible and come up with the best possible solution. Because if you're not enjoying the stories, if you're not getting into it, and while the stories are pretty short and not, necessarily super elaborate, and unlike other story games where even though the stories may seem unrelated, you kind of tie the stories together into one narrative. You might have to stretch to do that. This game does feel more like individual encounters that may be a little bit harder to tie together, because it's kind of sporadic as they happen. But you could just, at least when I've played it so far, a lot of people just want to go on adventures because they're fun and they want to see what's going to happen. That again leads to one potential problem of the game. You may, come across the same encounters over and over again. Well, you can make different choices. And, well, there are quite a few, and actually let me take a look here at how many different paragraphs there are. So, there's also a little section in the back that tells you some of the things, what they are. I was reading one story, and I'm like, I don't really know what this creature is, and it's like, oh, here it is in the back saying what it is. So there are 215 stories. So, based on just luck, you might see some of the same stories over and over again, but I think that's enough for me to enjoy the game, and I do believe they're planning on coming out with more stories. So basically, if this is a game you want to math out, and your group's not going to get into just enjoying the story and having fun, I don't recommend this game. But if you have a group that, yeah, they may want to win, but they, are fine with a little random stuff, not knowing what you're going to get, and just enjoying and getting into the characters and making the story as you go, this is a game that, for gamers who like to have fun, I can really highly recommend. And like I said, makes it pretty high up my games that came out last year. So there you go, a mixed recommendation based on you and your group. You may hate this, you may love it, but if this is a game for you and your style of gamers in your group, it's one that I can definitely highly recommend for those people. And for those who want to math it out, I've got plenty of other games that I really enjoy that, because I really enjoy both types of game, but as long as you know what you're getting into, this is one that I think you'll enjoy. Alright, well thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye!